Good morning. Today, I would like to share with you some observations on the Iron Age Hilltop settlements of Edom, and specifically with the case of Sela. Nearly 100 years ago, Nelson Gluck underscored the existence in southern Transjordan, from Shobak in the north to Ras Nakab in the south, of a series of elevated settlements called today mountain strongholds, which conform to the biblical references of a place in Edom named Sela, the rock. Although Gluck wanted to see this biblical Sela in Biyara, the impressive sandstone promontory over Petra, he acknowledged the regional dimension of the phenomenon and wrote, "There must have existed during the early Iron Age in eastern Palestine numerous sites built on more or less isolated prominences and known by the name Sela." In fact, since the mid-1980s, several scholars, such as Manfred Lindner and his team, or Piotr Rinkowski, have discovered and studied similar sites both in the Petra area and in northern Edom, around Tefillah and Beseira. Not long ago, Chaim Ben David has added some more places to the expanding list, and photos of most of them can be found in the APAME website. With the exception of Biyara, however, few of these sites have been studied in depth or fully published, but different authors have noticed a series of characteristics that these places share. Firstly, their chronology. Most of the sites were occupied for the first time, in some cases the only time, in the late Iron Age period, 8 to 6 centuries BCE, a moment of dense settlement in the Edom region. As noticed by Lindner and Knauf, the expansion of agriculture and the pressure on fertile land forced pastoralist groups into more marginal places. This process took place at the same time as Edom was politically configured as a sort of tribal confederation in the shape of a kingdom based in Beseira. Was this just a coincidence? Secondly, their location. Almost all of them are situated in the Edom highlands at altitudes of 12 to 1600 meters above sea level, and they were all built on steep promontories with very difficult access, which, by the way, is a physical challenge for a field study with traditional methods and techniques, and this may account for the scarcity of archaeological evidence from most of them. Thus, one of the main characteristics of these sites is the degree of protection they provided by virtue of their location in the mountains. Now, were they selected precisely for the unassailable situation? And if they were, why? Third, water management. Even though they are not far from sources of water, springs, wadis, in most cases, there is no water supply at the settlement itself, and rainwater had to be collected and stored by means of specially made reservoirs and cisterns, many of which are still visible today. At the site of Sela, more than 100 of these water gatherers or water tanks are still visible, have been documented, although their chronology is a matter of debate, as we will see later. The making of these structures shows an important investment of energy, resources, and labor force. Now, who controlled such works and how were they organized? 4. A noticeable feature in these settlements is the presence of a series of buildings and installations called longhouses, which would have served as storage areas to protect food and other goods obtained elsewhere and transported to these remote mountain strongholds. And in connection with this, in the vicinity of these wild and rough places, there is land that could be used for agriculture or even orchards. So what was the dialectic between the mountain settlers and these arable lands? Then the connection to permanent settlements. Lindner and Knauf saw an essential dichotomy in the Edomite landscape between sites on the plateau and those in the mountains, and they suggested that the mountain sites were temporary settlements with counterparts on the plateau, and that the majority of these Hilltop settlements could be chronologically, but also archaeologically related to a potential permanent settlement located nearby, the distance of 1.5 to 8 kilometers. But discussing this issue with Piotr Rinkowski, he reminds me that this is very difficult to demonstrate, as most of the sites have not been studied in detail or published, with the exception of Tawilan and Umalviyara, where precisely such dichotomy and links cannot be demonstrated at all. Quite the contrary, the two sites marked here in red show a completely different material culture. They probably have different agricultural economy. Moreover, Umalviyara does not seem to be a temporary settlement at all. So what was the connection between Tawilan and Umalviyara? This is very difficult to say. There were probably settlements inhabited by different tribes with different uses, customs, and material culture. And finally, the pottery. In most, yet not of these, all of these sites, the pottery found is limited in typology. It is local, coarse ware, probably used for cooking and storage, and there are few instances of painted pottery. According to some scholars, the pottery may reflect the functional nature of the settlements, or perhaps it represents the economic and social status of their inhabitants, cultural and tribal traditions, or maybe eating and cooking habits. All these different theories or interpretations are summarized by Binkowski in his publications of 2011 and 2013. The identification of the Edomite pottery is a difficult issue, and the only full study of ceramics from hilltop settlements is Umalviyara's, a site that, contrary to the norm, presents a complete range of pottery forms. Elaborating on the interpretation of ceramic typology, what can we say about the rationale of these places? The history and function of these sites have not been yet conclusively determined. It is not clear who occupied them and for what reason. Maybe there were economic aspects or perhaps more strategic or logistical reasons. Some theories consider the settlements as hideouts for bandits who attacked merchants' caravans crossing the regions, but others think the other way around, that strongholds were part of a fortification system that protected the routes from the Wadi Araba to the mountains. Perhaps the truth is much simpler than all this. The strongholds may reflect the reality of different groups with different tribal areas and different economies. At any rate, even if they look similar and share common features, not all of these places may have had the same function, and perhaps they had more than one purpose simultaneously, and or their role may have been modified in the course of time. One of the largest sites of this list of natural fortresses is Sela, located in the north of Edom, not far from Bessarabia, the alleged capital of the kingdom formed by the tribal confederation. By virtue of their proximity, it has been assumed that Sela and Bessarabia were connected in a way or another. But there is not much we can say about such connection, for Sela has not been studied in detail yet. The site stands on a DC sandstone promontory 200 meters above the surrounding wadis. The relative chronology of the surface material, pottery, studied by Mohamed Najjar and Michel Herles, seems to confirm occupation during at least the late Iron Age, the Nabatean, Roman, Ayyubid, Mamluk, and Ottoman periods. So Sela is one of the few hilltop settlements with a long occupation. And of course, a diachronic study of the settlement in the longue durée may be crucial for understanding dynamics of hilltop settlements through time in southern Jordan. But today, we will just focus on the late Iron Age Sela from the 8th to the 6th centuries. The importance of the site in this period, and by the way, the reason why I, an Assyriologist, got interested in it, is demonstrated by the presence of the impressive New Babylonian monument that King Nabonidus, 556-539 BCE, commissioned at the site with a cuneiform inscription and a relief. I am going to show you some pictures of the monument. You can see here on the eastern promontory of the site at 120 meters above the wadi. And here you can see the relief. Because of its location, we needed climbing techniques to study it, and we had to upsail down to photograph and draw the different parts of the monument. Here you can see a 3D reconstruction of the monument. The most significant characteristic of Sela, however, and the one that astonishes visitors, besides the fantastic views you get from the summit, is the great amount of water structures, channels, tanks, rock-cut water cisterns, and other constructions and installations used for rainwater harvesting, storage, transport, and management. You can see some of them here. Their shapes and sizes vary, as does their level of sophistication. Here, for example, you can see a cistern with a canal and a sedimentation basin covered by vegetation to the left of it. This variability may respond to chronological differences. We assume that different artisans in different periods used different technologies and elements to manufacture the cisterns and their mortars, which implies that the system was in use in more than one period. There's been a recent PhD dissertation from the University of Barcelona on the issue of water in this region, in Sela. We think the structures were reused over time and that mortars were added during different periods of use. As most of the structures are now filled with debris and sediment, there is no way of analyzing them without undertaking an archaeological excavation. A preliminary inspection was performed, and in some cases, the cisterns were even studied using climbing techniques for access, as you can see here. However, we have not attempted to establish an accurate and definitive typology of the structures because of the lack of independent archaeological evidence. In any case, it is useful to check this dissertation from Rosa Marsal of the University of Barcelona to get an overview of this water system of Sela. During the 2016 campaign, a sample of 16 mortars associated with hydraulic structures was selected for archaeometric and chronological studies. Here in the photo of the right, you can see the mortar in the walls of the cistern. In order to avoid bias, the samples were taken randomly. There was no prior selection of the cisterns from which they were taken. They were obtained in areas F, G, H, K, and L. Areas F, G, and H are located to the north and east of the site, near the monumental entrance to the summit, while areas K and L lie to the south and southwest, respectively. Mineralogical characterization by means of XRD and petrographic analysis were performed in the Catalan Institute of Human Paleoecology and Social Evolution in Tarragona by Valverdú and Soto, and some of the mortars were selected for radiocarbon dating at the National Center of Accelerators in Seville by Javi Santos. I will spare you the technical details that you can find here in our recent article, downloaded in the MAA Journal website. Let us briefly comment the results. The mineralogical and petrographic analysis suggests that all samples are lime-based plasters, mortars, showing variances in grain size, aggregates, and proportions of binder aggregate that indicate different preparations for the production of the mortars. Concerning the types, the differences observed in the binder aggregate ratio suggest the use of at least 3 different formulas or recipes. One in which the binder represents about 80% of the total sample. These are types 1 and 3. A second one in which it represents about 60%, type 2, and a third one in which the ratio is 50-50, types 4 and 5. All these differences may be due to techniques used by the various artisans, or to chronological reasons, or to both. So far, no absolute chronologies have been obtained from Iron Age Sela. However, we have performed a series of analyses in some structures of the water system with the aim of elucidating aspects related to the periods in which the site was occupied. Notwithstanding the difficulties presented by the methods currently used to radiocarbon date mortars, we decided to send some samples for chronological analysis anyway. Despite all the problems posed by the dates obtained and the conviction that they do not provide us with a reliable absolute chronology of the mortars, they furnish interesting data and represent the first step towards understanding these structures and the peoples who made them. As you can see in the table, some results coincide chronologically with various periods that are represented by the surface material, the pottery of Sela, and so they can be considered plausible. Iron Age, here marked in red, or the Mamluk and Ottoman periods, here marked in white and in gray. Others are older than the oldest pottery documented in the course of the survey. The site here is marked in orange. In our opinion, it is unlikely that Sela was occupied permanently before the late Iron Age II period. If it had been, one would expect to find ceramics, but there are none. Of course, one cannot rule out an occupation without pottery, but then it is a bit difficult to think of a society making and using sophisticated water tanks, but not using pottery. Even if the dates obtained are not totally unreasonable, the problem is that what is in doubt here is the reliability of the currently available methods for dating mortars, which determine the results. An additional problem is that we lack independent chronological indications for dating the mortars or cisterns of Sela, such as morphology, type of manufacture, etc., which may help us to confirm or refute the results obtained. For example, sample CN 4392 from cistern D22 is dated between the 8th and the 6th centuries BCE, which is in full agreement with some surface pottery and, of course, the evidence from the Nabonidus inscription, which belongs to the 6th century. Yet we lack an independent date for D22, so we cannot be sure that the result of the radiocarbon dating is accurate. In our opinion, all these data need to be confirmed in the future by further archaeological research at the site and more analysis, petrographic, mineralogical, and AMS radiocarbon, in order to obtain supplementary evidence that may corroborate or modify the results presented here. So we can say that Sela is a site with a remarkably rich archaeological legacy. Its size, the presence of architectural structures, the surface finds, the inscription of Nabonidus, its general layout, all these elements bear witness to its enormous archaeological potential in different periods of time. So there are some questions for future research, specifically on Iron Age Sela. First, why was Sela so important for Nabonidus? As it has been demonstrated before, a fundamental element of a Neo-Babylonian inscription is its setting. So there must have been something very special about Sela that prompted the Neo-Babylonian king to leave the material evidence of his crossing through Edom precisely here. Second, did Sela have a previous sacred or symbolic value before the Neo-Babylonian monument was carved in its slopes? What kind of place was Sela? Was it a holy site? There are some structures that have been identified with altars and chapels, such as this stairway to heaven that you can see here in the photo, but their chronology is uncertain. Or was it Sela military outpost? And third, was it connected to Bethsaida, as some authors assume? And if it was, in which way? How can we demonstrate this? And what sort of evidence should we need to be able to show any of this? Let us hope we can resume our work in the near future and solve some of these questions. Thank you very much for your attention.